Well, look, I have some concerns that what the government's chosen to do is snap back really to the old system, which had very, very high fees. So I think while, as you point out, there's a month time of transition, I don't think any economist is saying that our economy is going to be back thriving in a month's time. And so with very high fees, I am particularly worried that some family members, some women in particular, will not be able to re-enter the workforce as more jobs become available because childcare will just be too expensive.
So when you're saying snapback's not possible, what's the alternative? Heavily subsidised? I mean, would you say just free childcare until the end of the year, for example, until January? It's a pretty expensive policy, isn't it?
Well, look, actually, the government was spending less money during this trial period than it otherwise would have in normal circumstances. But look, there are a number of think tanks and policy institutes that have put different models out on the table, whether you would target that to those that are struggling to find work, those that have been underemployed, those small business people that are working as hard as ever but have no revenue. There's a range of options that have been put on the table, increasing the subsidy percentage, but the government chose to ignore all of these options. And when you talk about the rescue package, yes, on one hand they are giving extra money to centres, on the other hand they are taking JobKeeper away from centres. So it's taking with one hand while giving with the other. So it is pretty disingenuous, and I am worried about the impact this is going to have on families when they are struggling, worrying about the costs coming in, that children may well be withdrawn from childcare, stopping parents from going back to work and interrupting children's early education.
But what's Labor? I mean, you said there's a range of options from think tanks. Surely you've formed a view on what should happen. Would it just be, let's make childcare free until the end of the year, and what would that cost?
Well, look, I'm not in government, Tom. What I'm saying is the government had a range of options on the table and they chose just to snap back to the old expensive system, a system that in the last figures fees had increased by 7.2%. That is 3 times more than CPI prior to this pandemic. So we know that families were struggling under the cost then. We have currently got a situation where centres need to remain viable, but families also need to be able to afford childcare. We've heard from major providers that they are worried that demand will significantly go down as a result of reintroduction of fees and very high fees. So there is a number of options on the table, but the government chose none of those options.
Longer term, Labor, of course, at the last election took this policy that would make childcare free for families earning up to $70,000 and bigger subsidies up to about $170,000 or $60,000, I think it is. Is that likely to survive in some form at the next election?
Well, look, I'll be working on our policy in deep consultation with the sector. We want to see a sector that has high quality, accessibility and affordability. That's what we want to see. So I'll be working with the sector, but we don't know what it's going to look like. The government itself hasn't done any modelling with all the resources of government about how they expect demand to decrease as a result of bringing back fees. There's no information available. Providers are worried about what might happen as a result, and the government has had no answers. We don't know what's going to be the impact of taking away JobKeeper. Now, Tom, let's remember that is a broken promise, because the Prime Minister said only 3 or 4 days ago that he had no intention to stop JobKeeper early. Then 4 days later, we see JobKeeper is now stopped. The scheme would keep in place for 6 months, which can still be the case, albeit with some sectors not eligible. So he didn't actually say for every sector on that particular element. Well, I think he's been pretty tricky with those words.
Well, look, he was asked a question, call him tricky or otherwise, he never said it would stay for every sector. I just want to ask you that you mentioned think tanks and different approaches. There's been a suggestion that Australia should take the approach to childcare that it's about making sure you can maximise your workforce. It shouldn't be seen, first of all, as a cost on the budget, and that could see something along the lines of for the vast majority of families, 95% of costs are subsidised. Is that sort of proposal something Labor is looking at ahead of the next election?
Well, look, we had a proposal which, at the last election, which tried to align fee relief for those that need it the most. As I said, we'll go through that process. What we've got to do is balance two elements up when it comes to our early childhood education system. It is about workforce participation, ensuring women in particular can get back to work, but it's also about giving children the best start to life as well, and ensuring that they get access to early education, particularly in the years before school. So, and what we know from all the research is that has a double economic benefit. So when my focus going in as we develop our policy, and as I said, we don't know what the landscape's going to look, and I'll be carefully calibrating whatever Labor's response is.
I understand that. And look, to just shoot myself in the foot, I know you're not going to announce your policy right now, I'm a realist, but when you're looking at policies around the world, and I'm sure you take an interest in various elements, do you look at some of the countries in Scandinavia and think that would be great, but it's just too expensive? When you're talking about, subsidising nearly all childcare for people, for example.
Well, we do have to be economically responsible. We do need to get it to families that need it the most. And we do need to make sure that every child gets access to early education. So there are some of the principles that are driving me. I'm not going to say anything's off the table. I'm happy to look at all different policies, but they have to be affordable. I'm a realist when it comes to that. We have to make sure that they're affordable.
If you see it as first and foremost about workforce participation and making sure more women can get into the workforce, you might say, well, this Scandinavian model or 95% subsidy is affordable. I mean, affordable's in the eyes of the beholder, isn't it?
Well, look, it is, and at the last election we did that diligent work, which was a different, designed for a different economic time, in which we did the costings, we were able to pay for it and did the responsible work. So I intend, as we approach the next election, which I might say is still 2 years off, Tom, I will continue to do that diligent work again, and we will present an early education and care policy at the next election. But I will spend my time talking with providers and, importantly, families about what they would like to see and what would make things better for them. But you do have to strike the balance with any policy about what we can afford and what the social and economic dividends are. But I still maintain that investment in the early years delivers very high economic returns.